Good morning, everyone. My name is Pam Herrera, and I'm excited to be with you today. I did work in Capital School District for 30 years. I'm retired now, but as a part of one of my responsibilities in Capital, I did work with the Comprehensive Induction Program, and so I do have, I think, a good idea of what your role is and how you support mentors and new teachers, and all the teachers for the first 4 years. So hopefully today will give you some ideas and you'll get some valuable resources around DTGSS. All right, so let's get started. And for those of you who don't know, because I know you hear DTGSS all the time, DTGSS stands for the Delaware Teacher Growth and Support System, okay? So everyone should have this, you should have gotten a link. And so if you pull this up, you have one for the morning and you have one for the afternoon. And so everything that is in this participant's guide are some of the key things. Like you have a copy, the very first link is a copy of the presentation. And then when we do the activity, there's a link in there for that. So some of the key things that I'll be highlighting this morning are all in this participant's guide. So it's just an easy way, instead of having tons of paper and, just to pull up any of the items that you might want to take a look at or that you need. So what I want you to do is think about, I know that it was about half, it looks like about half of you, but think about your current level of knowledge of DTGSS. So if you are very comfortable with the observation framework and the process, and you think you can probably explain it to someone else, then you would pick a level 5. If you have a good level of understanding and the process, 4. I have a basic understanding and the process, I have heard of it, but that's about it. And I'm not familiar with DTGSS or the observation framework at all. So if you would, go ahead and you can click on the link in your participant's guide, and you're going to identify which one of those levels best suits your needs, where you are currently in your level of knowledge. For this morning, what we're going to do is we're going to really talk about the mindset shifts. So one of the reasons that we're switching from DPAS to DTGSS really is about those mindset shifts. And so we'll talk about the difference between moving from a focus on teaching to a focus on learning. We'll talk about the observation framework itself. We'll also talk about ways that you can use that framework to support your mentors and your new teachers. We'll talk about the role. What is your role? And what are some ways that you might be able to provide that support? And then finally, this afternoon will be spent on taking a look at some resources that are available that will support you in working with both the new teachers as well as your mentors. So by the end of today, hopefully, you will be able to describe the research and mindset shifts that support DTGS, summarize those key components and key features, really come up with maybe a beginning plan about what your next steps might be and how you want to use some of this information in your comprehensive induction program. And finally, maybe make some choices about the resources and identify some of the resources that will best fit your particular needs. So I'm going to start just with thinking about, why are you a lead mentor? What is your why? And so I'm going to put a scenario up, and I just want you to kind of read it. I'm not going to read it to you. And I'll just give you a minute to do that, and then we're going to talk about it. Okay, so what we know is that, and I think particularly now more than ever, there is a need, a teacher need. There's a teacher shortage in a lot of districts. And we have a lot of teachers leaving the profession. And so your role is critically important. Because ultimately, mentors and lead mentors are the ones who have that impact on students, because if you're providing support to those teachers, then that has a direct impact on our students. So when we think about Sam And that's one student. Think about all the other SAMs that we might have, and think about the daily practice of teaching, and always remember SAM when you think about that. So after reading the scenario, what I'd like for you guys to do is just turn and talk with a shoulder partner. So the first one is thinking about the impact that mentoring might have on Sam's particular overall school experience. So just turn and talk for a second about what kind of impact that might be. So what kind of impact might the mentoring program or the induction program have? How does that ultimately impact Sam? So when you think about why, so what is your why in terms of, this is a difficult job. Being a lead mentor is a difficult job. And so when you think about that, what are your personal, your professional goals related to that? So I'll give you a minute just to think about your why. Why did you accept this position? Why did you choose to do it? And so I'll give you a minute to think, and then just turn and talk to someone sitting next to you and talk a little bit about your personal or professional goals around being a lead mentor. Great. So again, you're in a critical role. No pressure or anything, but what you do is very important. And finally, when you think about, and especially maybe those of you who have been in the pilot, so how do you think that implementing DTGSS can help ensure that every student, every child has an effective teacher? So I'll just give you a second to talk about that. So what role does DTGSS play in not just supporting new teachers, but all teachers? So how does it impact classroom practice? So I'll give you a minute to talk about that. Okay, so what we know, and based on the conversation that we just had, that skillful teaching matters. And so all of this is about the why. So why would we change a system of evaluation? Why would we move from DPAS to DTGSS? And so one of the reasons is we want to make sure that our students have the most effective teachers as possible. And what we know is that teachers in the top 20%, of being the most effective teachers generate 5 to 6 months more growth than the less effective teachers. And so if you look over here, it doesn't matter if it's reading or math. So if you look at math, what we saw were gains from the 50th percentile to the 69th percentile. And in reading, students moved from the 50th percentile to the 63rd percentile in reading. So that's pretty significant. And the other thing you want to think about is, again, if we have students who are in a classroom that's maybe that are lower performing, then if you're in another classroom the next year that's very similar, then that compounds. So can you imagine a couple of years? So we know that skillful teaching is very important. The other thing that's important is leadership. And so it almost has the same effect size as a skillful teacher, but the impact of having an effective principal on student achievement is nearly as large as what it is for the teacher. So it's really important, again, that having both, there's a greater likelihood of success. And so having that principal, and this is where DTGSS fits in, is in engaging in instructionally focused interactions, kind of like the interactions that you guys were just talking about. And that is really important. And it's about those ongoing conversations. And so, again, we just want to make sure that our likelihood of success is increased. And having those conversations can do that. So when the committee started meeting, like in 2018, because this, again, has been a work in progress, they did a lot of research around what does an effective evaluation system look like. And so an excellent evaluation system, first of all, it ensures that each student has an effective teacher. Second of all, it provides feedback on an ongoing basis, and there's a shared belief, or that's like what the framework does. It's that common language and those common practices that center around what will have the greatest impact on student learning. And finally, it supports teachers with a continuous growth of, a cycle of continuous growth. And so as teachers, having that mindset, that we always are wanting to learn something new. I learn something new every day, even still. And I've been in the profession for a long time. So it's just having that mindset of, I can always get better at my craft. I can always improve my practice. Okay. Okay, there we go. Introducing the Delaware Teacher Growth and Support System. Okay. So when the committee began their work, they used a theory of action. And so what they decided, and all the decisions about DTGSS were based on this, it was if they could define what excellent teaching looks like, and then they could help to develop excellent teaching, that ultimately that would increase teacher effectiveness, which then in turn would have the greatest impact on student learning and student success. And so some of the key messages around DTGSS are, first of all, this whole system, this whole structure is homegrown, Delaware made, 302, whatever, It's driven by your peers, by Delaware leaders and teachers from across the state who got together and spent a lot of time, again, trying to make sure that they got it right. That they wanted to establish that common definition of teaching and learning excellence, that we prioritize student learning and teacher growth. And so the priority, again, is a focus on both teachers and students, that instead of having one observation a year, which in a lot of cases was happening, we have multiple observations with explicit and actionable feedback. That the focus is on the collaborative conversations that are ongoing about teaching and learning. And finally, really, if this is happening, then what happens in the building is that our professional culture changes, okay? Because we have that openness. We're willing to take risks. We're willing to have some of those conversations around how we can get better. So the whole focus moves from what the teacher's doing, from teaching focused to learning focused. So if we look at DPAS-2 and we look at DTGSS, this is how they're different. So first of all, in DPAS, it was more focused on what the teacher did in a set of standards or expectations. But in DTGSS, what you'll find is that it looks at both. So it's not just what the teacher's saying and doing, but it's also what the students in that classroom are saying and doing, and are they learning. Typically in DPAS, there were 1 to 3 observations depending on the level of experience of the teacher. But in DTGSS, there are short, frequent observations that will build evidence of that consistent practice over time. In DPAS-2, we had conferences that, again, the teacher would talk about how they felt like the lesson went, and then it was about signing off. And so it was kind of like, okay, I'll see you next year, right? Well, in DTGSS, the conferences really reflect on instructional choices that were observed during that lesson, and really talk about what are some next steps that I can do. What is it that I want to work on? What are my steps for next time when we have our next conversation? So in DPAS-2, feedback's driven by suggestions and recommendations. In DTGSS, it's driven by suggestions and recommendations that specify the desired outcome, and as I just said, the action steps. So it becomes more of a cycle of practice versus just isolated events. And then finally, I think you guys already said this, that it was all about the compliance. Okay, so filling out all the paperwork, making sure that I had everything done. But this is more about the reflection and the analysis and collecting evidence over time and looking at that. So with the committee, the whole focus was on, what they did first is they designed the framework. So when I say framework, and we'll talk about that in just a second, I mean the rubric. So what you picked up when you came in is the observation framework. A framework, yes, it is a rubric, but we like to call it a framework because we really want the focus to be on the language, the descriptors, the language around that, and not the numbers. And so, so I just want to make sure that we're clear. Because I'll say framework a whole lot because I'm so used to it now. But you can call it a rubric if you want. So, but because it really is the same thing. And so the framework drove the process. So the first thing the committee did was develop that framework and identify those practices and create that common language. And then they moved to, okay, so what does the implementation of this look like over the year? So now we're going to talk, so everyone should have a copy. You should have picked up a copy of the framework. And so I'm going to just go through and we're going to talk about what those components are. And so if everyone just wants to open that, and, and I'll reference them. So in your participants guide, you also do have an electronic version. But for the activities that we'll do this morning, it's nice to have a hard copy just so you can kind of look through it, because it's easier than trying to scroll. So, all right, so what you'll notice is there are 3 performance areas, okay? So there's 3 performance areas. These are the key ideas that fit under that observation framework. So what I'm going to do first is kind of just go through and tell you what the components are, and then we'll go back through and we'll actually get into more detail about each performance area, okay? So what you'll notice is that there's also an essential question after each. So for performance area 1, learning environment, to what extent does the environment support all students to learn, okay? Performance area 2 is engagement in learning. To what extent does the instruction support and engage all students? And performance area 3 is maximizing learning. To what extent do students retain and apply their learning with productive struggle? So there's 3 areas with essential questions. The next thing you'll notice, there are 3 indicators. So the bulleted, under each performance area is an indicator. There's 3 of them. So you'll have 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 2.1, 2 points, and so on. So those indicators are important because they more clearly articulate what that performance area might look like and sound like. So those are some of the key components for that specific performance area. So performance area 1 has structures for learning, positive classroom environment, and equitable access. So this whole area includes things like routines and procedures, behavior management, student commitment to learning, equitable access. And what we know is that performance area 1 is necessary, but it's not sufficient, right? So it's not enough just to have a supportive environment. We also have to have the instructional piece that matches that environment, right? So supportive environments alone do not guarantee that students will learn. So performance area 2 is objectives for learning, learning experiences, and checks for understanding. And this includes, of course, the objectives, your learning objectives, and your criteria for success. It includes the learning experiences. So what are the kids actually doing during the lesson? Lesson pacing, what instructional materials are being used, checking for understanding and feedback. So performance area 2 includes the actual teaching and learning that's happening. And it connects to performance area 1 because both that environment and that instruction need to go together. They need to merge. They're both necessary to ensure students' success. And then performance area 3 is maximizing learning, and we have rigorous assignments, questioning and discussion, and academic language and vocabulary. And so, again, performance area 3 is about the rigor, and it's about students having time to process new learning and being able to transfer their new learning. It's about students' assignments, questioning and discussions, and academic language and vocabulary. And really, performance area 3 is kind of where everything comes together because it's the culmination of performance areas 1 and 2, and it really is making sure that there's that solid environment that supports learners combined with solid content and delivery that leads to student success. Okay, so the next thing that you'll see, you have your indicators, and then you have what we call descriptors. And so the descriptors are the bulleted language that, and that was already mentioned about. So like there's some of the language supports what you might observe the teacher doing, and then some of the language includes what you might also see the students doing. And so what the descriptors do is they provide some examples of evidence, the types of things that you would expect to see going into that classroom. One of the things I want to stress is it's not a checklist, so the expectation is not that you have to see all of these before you move to the next level. Because one of the things that happens is when the observer comes in, so they can only collect evidence on what they actually see. And so again, they would expect to see some of these things, but they might not see all of these things. And you see there's 4 levels of performance. So one of the things I will mention is, so level 4 includes what is in level 3 and then an extension of that. So again, I want to mention that, but it still doesn't mean every single thing. What it means is that that you would see some of those things happening, and then you would move. Then level 4 talks more about the student ownership and more student-centered. Okay. So the other thing you're going to notice is something called core teacher skills. So I'm going to give you a minute to find those. Because I think someone the other day said, well, I didn't know those were there. So it was interesting. So there are core teacher skills. And so after the framework, you'll see, and there are core teacher skills for each of the performance areas. And so why do we have core teacher skills? So they're not evaluated, they're not rated, but we know that teaching is really complex, right? I mean, there's a lot of things that happen when we're teaching students. There's a lot of behind the scenes work, things that happen. And so what the core teacher skills do is they also describe some of the things that are happening or you would that are behind the scenes. And so it's some of those expectations or, there's some guidance, some things around what you also might see or you might not see. So you can use these in a variety of ways. We'll get into more detail about maybe some ways that the core teacher skills would be beneficial. So I just wanted to make sure that you knew that they are there, and there are core teaching skills for each that help, again, describe that performance area in more detail. And then what you'll also see is something called the SMART card. Okay, so this is the condensed version, so it's the one-pager, all right? So it's the condensed version of that whole, the whole framework. And so this is a nice tool. Again, it's a great tool for planning, just to kind of help you stay focused. It's bulleted with some of the key criteria for each of those indicators. So again, just making sure that you know that there's a SMART card that's also available as a part of the framework. Okay, so let's talk about the elephants in the room. So did anyone see a whole section or performance area just on planning? No, okay. Does that mean planning's not important? No, it doesn't mean. So in the past, planning, so the whole planning section, it was really done in isolation, right? But what we know is that it's better when it's more authentic when it's connected to what's actually happening in the classroom. So when the observer or evaluator comes, they're only going to evaluate or observe what they see happening in the classroom. And so a part of the conversation might be around planning, but it's connected to what's seen. It's not done in isolation. So that is a huge shift. And so again, I want to point out that planning is still just as important as it ever was. It just doesn't, it just means that there's not a separate area. What the committee really wanted to make sure of, again, that it was more authentic and that planning was a part of the practice of teaching. And because if it's going really well in the classroom, chances are there was a lot of planning involved, right? Professional responsibilities, again, that's something that is measured or discussed in a different way, but the framework is all about instruction. Professional responsibilities, it could be a little connected, but it's really not as connected to, again, that daily teaching and learning. So that was taken out as well. Again, it doesn't mean it's not important. All right, so we talked about the 3 performance areas. There is also an additional performance area that is called Performance Area 4, Outcomes for Learning. So what happens is, if you remember in DPAS, we had Component 5, right? Component 5 is now a part of Component 4, Performance Area 4. Okay, so it's not going away. But what's different is that the outcomes for learning also includes something called a professional growth priority area. And we'll talk more about this afternoon when we talk about the process a little bit. But these are the 2 things that encompass the outcomes for learning, or the performance area 4 in DTGSS. The other thing I want to mention is that for this coming year, it's exactly the same. So whatever you were doing in Component 5 with your student improvement goals, it's going to be exactly the same this year, okay? There are committees that are meeting and looking at maybe making some adjustments or shifts or changes, but for this year anyway, and maybe the next, I don't know, you know, but I know for this year, you'll go in and you'll set your goals. If you use the pre and post test, you would continue to do that. So all of that process is the same. It's just now housed in Performance Area 4. And then the last thing I want to mention is that both of these are in Performance Area 4. This is not rated. So the rating for Performance Area 4 is strictly the student improvement goal. Okay. All right, or student growth goal. So here's some of the key features, and again, I'm just going to pick out a couple that I think are really important for you to notice. So when you look at the framework, one of the things that you'll notice, again, is that the framework really does focus on what students and teachers are saying and doing. So the collection of evidence includes, like a lot of times, quotes of, you know, what is actually happening in that classroom. It's more streamlined, so we know that there's only 9 indicators, which is less cumbersome to implement than all of the ones that we had in DPAS 2. It's more objective. So the other thing you'll notice with the framework is there's no quantifying language like some of the time, most of the time, because like I always wondered, like, how do you measure most of the time? Okay, like what does that really look like? So you won't see that. And finally, it totally focuses on only what's seen and observed in the classroom. Okay, so it's actually classroom practice, what's happening. And we already talked about the planning and the professionalism. So here's the difference, DPAS 2, there were 18 criteria, we now have 9. Evaluators used to collect evidence just in components 2 and 3. Now what you'll see is they'll collect evidence in performance areas 1, 2, and 3. As a part of that, I'll mention, so the expectation when they do come is not that they have to collect evidence in all of those, okay? So when they come, they'll only collect evidence in what they see. The goal would be by the end of the year, then you would have evidence collected over time, over the course of the year in all 9. I just want to mention that. Here we had 2 rubrics. Now we just have one, the framework. Component 5 changes to performance area 4. And finally, the levels of performance are used instead of highly effective, effective needs improvement. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go into a little bit more detail about each of the performance areas. So we're going to start with performance area 1. And so we already said that performance area 1, there's 1.1 structures for learning, 1.2 positive classroom environment, and 1.3 equitable access. It includes things like routines and procedures, behavior expectations, maintaining student attention, commitment to learning, growth mindset, reframing mistakes, equitable access, and strategies that maximize the engagement of all students. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to do a breakout group. So when we do the breakout group, we're going to go to the tables in the back with the chart paper, okay? And I'm going to give you guys a choice in just a second, so you'll get to choose which group you want to work on. So what we're going to do is we're going to get into more detail about performance area 1. What does it look like? What does it sound like? What might you see teachers doing, saying, and doing? You'll want to bring your framework with you, okay, when you come over back to the tables. So that's the first thing that we're going to do. So, and we'll start with that, and then we'll come back together and I'll have you share, and then we'll do the next activity. But you're going to stay, for all of these activities, you'll stay in that particular group. So the far left over here will be 1.1. If you want to focus on structures for learning, then you would go there. Classroom environment will be in the middle, 2.1. And then equitable access, 1.3, will be at the end. And so again, you're going to work specifically related to that one indicator, and so you can decide which one you want to work on. So go ahead, there's some markers and stuff back there. You'll need a recorder and a reporter. So let's go ahead and decide which group you want to go to back here. Okay, so now we're going to practice. So what I'm going to have you do is underneath your, because now we talked about, okay, we already talked about what it might look like and sound like. Now we're going to actually watch a classroom. And you're going to get to take some notes on the evidence that you see in the classroom, okay? And so what we'll do is take notes. I have a form here. So you could either just use a piece of paper, or there's a form that looks like this, like in this video clip, what do you see the teacher doing or saying? What do you see the students doing or saying? Or as I said, you can just use a piece of paper. You don't have to use this document. So you're just going to jot down, as the video is on, you're just going to jot down some of the things that you see. You're just going to be a collector of evidence, right? And the other thing I really want to stress is that this isn't necessarily because you'll actually be going and doing observations. The reason for doing this is actually seeing what it looks like in the classroom is an extension. It's about deepening your understanding around each performance area. So this one is more specifically focused on performance area 1. Okay, so when we sort our notes after, you'll be focused specifically on 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3. Okay, is everyone kind of ready? Okay. All right, so you should have a good amount of evidence already. And so what I want you to do is take the evidence that you collected, and then there's a form like this. So we're going to analyze and sort our evidence. And really you're going to be working with someone, so everyone doesn't need this. So just one between whatever your group, if your group is 2 people or 3 people. And so what you're going to do is look at the evidence you collected. And you're probably going to talk with your group about where does the evidence best fit related to performance area 1. Does it best fit in 1.1, structures of learning? Does it best fit in 1.2, positive classroom environment? Or does it best fit in equitable access? So I'm going to give you a couple minutes. And so whoever has the form is just going to jot down some of that evidence. Okay, so we're going to do the same sort of structure, and we're going to go into performance area 2 now. I don't think we're going to get through performance area 3, but we'll probably make it through because it's 11 o'clock now. So what we're going to do is take a closer look. So if you want to turn to performance area 2, what we're going to do is talk about the indicators, objectives for learning, learning experiences, and checks for understanding and feedback. So this performance area includes learning experiences, criteria for success, looking at the balance of the lesson and the lesson experiences, and is there a balance of the content and processing time? So is the structure of that lesson give students the opportunity to process that new information and do something with it? Explanatory devices, the lesson pacing and the kinds of instructional materials that are being used, checking for understanding and feedback, and the type of feedback. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing if you guys want to get in groups, but I want to clarify. So one of the things I did in performance area 2 is I went through and just really wanted to provide some clarity around these 4 terms. So we have objective, activity, directions, and criteria for success. So again, objective would be what students will know and be able to do by the end of the lesson. The activity is what the teacher and our students will do. So the activity or the learning experiences during the lesson that are connected to the objective. And so directions are totally different. So directions are explicit instruction or guidance that's going to tell you the steps or process. And sometimes I think directions get confused with criteria for success, and I don't know if you guys have had that happen, but so the criteria for success are actually the attributes or descriptors. So this has to be connected to the objective, right? And so the criteria for success is really students knowing how to meet the objective. What is it that students need to do? What does success look like? And it could be a rubric, but it doesn't have to be. So again, be thinking about clarifying those terms, because I think sometimes people get confused. So we're going to go back. We're going to go back over there. If you want to go in your same groups, just for the interest of time, okay, I take that back. I'm going to give you a choice. Okay, so you can either do 2.1, objectives for learning, which will be at the beginning. You can do 2.2, learning experiences, which will be in the middle. Or you can do 2.3, which is checks for understanding and feedback. Okay, so decide which indicator you want to work on. We're going to go back to the chart paper, and we're going to follow that same sort of process in talking about performance area 2. Okay, so take your frameworks with you and decide which one you want to work on. So what we're going to do is we're going to practice. So we're going to collect evidence the same way that we did before. We're going to show a brief video clip, and then we'll come back and talk about it. And then that'll be the last thing we do before we go to lunch. So you can either use this form, turn it over, or you can just use a piece of paper to collect notes. What I'll say is this one does have the teacher talking. So this video clip is a little different from the standpoint of it's not just the classroom. They give you some more information about what's happening, but I just thought it was a good example of some of those indicators from performance 2, and that's why I thought I would share it. So, you guys ready? I'm going to go ahead and start it. looking at your evidence and having a conversation about where it fits, where did you have the most evidence? 2.1, 2.2, or 2.3? Based on the descriptors. Okay, I'm hearing some 2.2. Anyone else? 2.3 there, okay, 2.3. So, and again, there's not a right or wrong answer. It just depends on the evidence that you collected. And we really only watched like maybe 5, we didn't watch very much of it. You know, again, I think what I try to do is pick a video that kind of exemplifies like what that performance area, you know, could look like. And I think, you know, again, that's good to help help deepen your understanding of what it looks like in the classroom versus just looking at the framework or having a conversation around it. So again, the whole reason that this conversation is important is more to help you help new teachers and mentors, again, to improve their knowledge and skills about how that might look in the classroom. So what I'll do is this afternoon, we're going to specifically get into resources that you can use with mentors and new teachers. And so these are some video clips. What I can do is in some of the modules that you'll get to take a look at this afternoon, we can add some so that if that's something that you want to use as a part of your work, you can. So, is there a particular indicator in performance level, in performance, no. Is there a particular, yes, that's not even right. It should be it says performance level. I'm going, performance area 2. Is there a particular indicator that you feel like new teachers would need extra support with? 2.1, 2.2, 2.3. You think? Is there a particular one that they sometimes need more support with? Yes?
I'd say like designing their assessments. Like how do I gather data?
Okay. So you think, so that would be kind of like 2.3. So designing it, but then what to do as a result, what to do with it, with that information. Okay. Any other thoughts? Again, some might not have a good understanding of success criteria. So the criteria for success, again, is something that you might want to spend some additional time with, because that goes right along with that the 2.1, the lesson objective, and again, what does success look like? So. Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. And so this morning we really talked all about the content behind DTGSS, because we talked about the observation framework. So we have the Delaware Teacher Growth and Support System, and then the observation framework is underneath that, right? So it's a part of it. The other part is the process. So it's the part about implementation. And so we're going to go through this afternoon and just talk a little bit about the implementation process. So go back. Everyone should have the link for this afternoon, so you can pull that up. Again, the slides, the presentation slides are in there as well. The activities that we do this afternoon, and the example that's up here probably looks a little different than yours because I made a few changes, but anyway, you have the link. You should be able to access everything. And so as we go through the afternoon and go through some of the group work that we'll be doing, you'll have access to the links in here. So this afternoon, we have 2 goals pretty much. The first one is we're going to talk about the key events that support that whole implementation process. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do chat stations where you'll be able to go through and review some of the resources that you can use to work with and align DTGSS into your current comprehensive induction program. Okay, so the implementation process. these are the key events. So there are 3 things that happen, and this is like on an annual cycle. So we have the fall conference, we have the mid-year conference, and we have the spring conference. And so the ongoing observation and feedback happens as evaluators do a minimum of 3 short observations, short meaning a minimum of 15 minutes. Okay, and so the observation debrief happens within 5 working days, and the observation feedback can be in face-to-face through email. It doesn't have to be like we've done in the past where it has to be a face-to-face conference, or it could be done virtually. So there are some options there. So the fall conference includes 2 major things. The first thing, of course, is your student improvement, your growth. You're setting your goals for student improvement. And the other thing is something called a professional growth priority area. And both of those together make up what's called the professional growth plan. And there are 3 types of professional growth plans. There's a collaborative professional growth plan, a self-directed, and a directed. At the mid-year conference, there can be a mid-year conference that's optional. But what happens at the mid-year is you're still monitoring your progress. So you're reflecting on your professional growth priority area at the mid-year and during the year, and you're also reflecting on your student improvement or your student growth and progress. And then at the spring conference is when you do have that, again, meeting with your evaluator where you'll go through and look at all the evidence that's been collected over the course of the year. So one of the things I want to mention is that there are no ratings. So after each observation, in the past, you would get ratings from DPAS. With DTGSS, there are no ratings. Your evaluator will sit and talk about the descriptors like we did this morning and talk about the descriptors and the evidence that was collected, but there's not a rating given until the very end of the year. Okay, so that's a mindset shift, that's a change, am I right? So the fall conference includes the professional growth plan, and that includes the outcomes for learning, performance area 4, the conversations around student growth, and the professional growth priority area. There are 3 kinds of professional growth plans: a collaborative professional growth plan, a directed professional growth plan, and a self-directed. So let's talk about what those look like. Most of the schools that were in the pilot, the evaluator is the one who makes the decision about the type of plan. And so most people were on a collaborative growth plan, which means that there's collaboration between the evaluator and the teacher, and that priority area is set in consultation with the administrator. And teachers who are making progress and meeting growth goals, like if they looked at your past performance, that might be a reason to do the collaborative growth plan. And typically it could be for teachers new to a building, doesn't have to be. Again, all of that is determined by the evaluator, the building level evaluator. And then there's self-directed, where the priority area is identified and monitored by the teacher, and it's for teachers for the most part who have consistently high performance and meeting growth goals, and the teacher and the administrator may still need to have some conversations around supports, because no matter what type of growth plan, professional growth plan you have, the conversation at the fall conference still needs to be around how can that evaluator or that principal support you in meeting your priority area goals? So do you need some resources or materials to implement that? Do you need some professional learning opportunities? Do you want to do some work in PLCs? So again, this is all conversations that should be happening at the fall conference. And then the directed growth plan is a plan where there's much more support is given. It could be for teachers that are new to the profession, but it doesn't have to be. Again, that's a conversation, and that's at the discretion of the administrator. So this one is set primarily by the administrator, who does have consultation with the teacher, but again, it's more directed and more support. And so the whole purpose of a directed growth plan is really about that additional support that might be needed for a teacher. So one of the things that is new, so in DPAS there was an improvement plan. In DTGSS there really isn't an improvement plan. So what would happen is, over the course of the year, if there was a teacher who was really struggling, the following year, that principal might identify that they want to put that teacher into a directed growth plan so they can offer more support. So it's really all about providing that support to help, help that teacher progress in whichever area they're focused on. And so it's not about the improvement plan. So again, there is no improvement plan in DTGSS. So at the fall conference, these are the two things you'll be having conversations about. And so the whole goal of the professional growth priority area is about reflecting and making a decision about one area that you want to work on. So I want you to read the paragraph at the top, and then there's sticky notes in the basket. And I just want you to pick one word. So if you were to read that paragraph, and there's not a right answer here, okay? If you were to read that paragraph, and then what you're going to do is just identify one word that really stands out to you in that paragraph. Okay, so I'll give you just a minute to do that. The whole goal is really about thinking about what is it that you want to work on. And so the length of time, it's designed, it could take the whole year, but a lot of times it doesn't. So as you're kind of monitoring your progress and you're collecting evidence, then when you're done, you're done. So some people, you could be done in January. So, and what is a professional growth priority area? Well, it's taking a look at data and making a decision about what is it that I want. How do I want to improve my craft? What do I really want to work on this year? And it obviously will be tied to one of the indicators on the framework, right? So it has to be connected. So you can't do something like parent involvement, right? Because not that that's not important, but where does that really fit into the instructional piece, right? So you look at the data that you have to help you kind of make a decision. It's tied to an indicator. It includes action steps, timelines, and then we talked already about the resources and support that you might need. It's set it's every year, and it can be adjusted if you find that maybe you need to, you're not going to make it by the end of the year. So you want to tweak it, or you want to adjust that goal, and it drives the focus for feedback and support. So when the evaluator comes in, they'll know that might be your priority area, and they'll be collecting evidence as well as you'll be collecting your own evidence of your progress. It's developed in consultation, and all of the information is captured in DTGSS. So one of the things I want to stress is that it's not that we identify that priority area in the fall conference, right, and then we don't talk about it again till the summative conference. There really should be ongoing conversations and discussions around, are the supports needed? Do you need anything else from me? How's it going? What kinds of evidence have you collected so far? And so on. So again, it's an ongoing conversation. So the mid-year conference, again, is optional. And at the mid-year conference, even if you're not having a face-to-face or you're not having a conversation at the mid-year conference, a formal with your evaluator, you're still going to continue to work on your priority area and take a look at your student growth and any data that you need to collect in terms of that. And we already talked about there's no ratings assigned till the very end of the year. So at the spring conference, what happens is, again, you're going to get your ratings at the spring conference. And I'll go through the process in just a second. But again, at the spring conference, you're going to revisit your priority area. You're going to share your student improvement growth. you'll discuss each indicator and the performance area. So you'll get rated on each indicator and then the overall performance area. And the rating for the performance area, of course, is based on the ratings for the indicators. All right, so then what happens, so this is the process. So before you have that summative or that spring conversation, you will get a self-rating form. So what you will do is you will look at all the evidence that's been collected over the year in DSC, because every time the evaluator comes, they collect evidence. You'll be able to see that along the way as well. So you'll know what evidence has been collected. So you look at the evidence, and based on the evidence, you're going to do a self-rating, okay? So you'll rate yourself based on the evidence, and then you submit that to the administrator. And then the administrator looks at what you submitted. They look at the evidence and they make a determination, again, about looking at the evidence, the descriptors, and the rating that would come. So that's why the summative, that conversation in the spring is important. If there's any discrepancies between where you think you might be in terms of the descriptors and where they think you are, that's when that conversation happens, okay? And so, so then the conversation around student improvement and also around your priority area happen. And based on that, you can also have a conversation around the next year. So what happens is the information and the data that you collect from the end of the year can help drive what your priority area will be the following year. And so that's how this becomes a cycle. And so it's a continuous cycle versus, okay, we're done, let's start over. I mean, it's really about that cycle of conversation, and that's something that DTGSS does, is it provides those structures for that. So before every year for novice and experienced had summative conferences or summative ratings every year. Now it's all educators. We talked about the improvement plan and how there's no improvement plan now, and that what we use is the more directed growth plan. Okay, so those are the key events. We talked about the conference, the fall conference, the mid-year conference, the spring conference, and the types of plans. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do chat stations. And so I'm going to just go through and explain how we're going to do this. So in group one, you're going to review the quick reference guide for teachers, the scavenger hunt, and then the professional growth priority area resources. Group two is going to do the skillful teacher, and if you don't have a skillful teacher book, you will get one. And the skillful teacher, group two, is the only one that has copies of the crosswalk, because what we've done is identify how does the skillful teacher, how do the chapters align to the observation framework. So the skillful teacher group has some hard copies there. You can actually work on the scavenger hunt during the 15 minutes that you're over there, okay? And that's what it looks like. So you can take your book and actually go through and look at do some of the activities. You don't have to do everything, but again, you can get an idea of what it looks like. Group three will do the resources for mentors, guiding questions, scenario, and then the collaborative log. And then group four is going to do the training modules. And so you'll get to look. So I just want to mention that all of the training modules aren't done yet. The goal is to have them done by the 1st of August. And so, but you can get an idea from the overall resources, and so every one of the modules will have a facilitator's guide, presentation slides, a participant's guide, equipment and materials, and additional activities. But I just wanted you to have an idea of what will be available, and each of the modules will be about 30 minutes, because obviously you can't go back and do 6 hours. So it will include some of the things we did today, but it'll be a lot more than that too. It's not just that. But so some of the things that we're doing today will be in modules 1 and 2, because those are more the overviews. All right, so everyone will have a document that looks like this. So all of the things I just showed you are in this document. So for group 1, you just will go in and pull up the documents, and you're just going to kind of go through them. And then in your group, you're going to have a conversation around what are some of the key components for those resources. How might they be used for comprehensive induction program, or for like lead mentors, for mentors and new teachers, and then who will benefit the most. So who would benefit the most from these resources? So you're going to have the conversation, and then you'll have someone will record that conversation. So the first group that you go to will you'll record it on the chart paper. But as you move, you won't re-record it, you'll just add to it. So when you change groups after the first group, you'll look at what the first group did, and you'll add to it, okay? So then you'll just kind of add anything that you think that they might have missed. And then for you personally, you can take your own notes on here so that when you get ready to use them, you'll have the information around, okay, well, I can't remember, we looked at all these resources, who is this best for, okay? So at the very end, we'll put the chart paper up, we'll put the final ones up after everyone's cycled through, and then you guys can walk around, and I'll let you guys can kind of add some additional notes to your own document, okay? Does that make sense? So, okay, any questions before we move?